preserved in that qualified voter file for a period of not less than 5 years, and they are deleting these records. And matter of fact, against that backdrop, our Michigan Secretary of State has issued a directive to all of our election officials, all of our clerks in the state, that within 7 days of certification of the election, they're supposed to destroy all poll book records. Now, just so you know, the poll book is part of the audit trail. So if you don't trust the data that's up in the state records with the qualified voter file, then the next step is you're going to go off and check into the poll book records for all the municipalities to see what they are showing as being uploaded into the state record as part of the audit trail. And notice how the Secretary of State has ordered the destruction of those materials within 7 days of election. That's in direct violation of federal law, which is under United States Code, Title 52, Section 20701, which requires that those records be preserved for a period of no less than 22 months. So, guys, at the very least, you've got unlawful acts being occurring. But I would submit that not only do we have evidence of election fraud, we have significant evidence of election fraud, not just in Fulton County with 22,534 vote mismatch, but in Michigan, where you had 499,850 vote mismatch in an election reportedly decided by 154,188 votes. That is significant in both cases. And Maricopa and Wisconsin, and Maricopa County in Arizona and Wisconsin, and also in Pennsylvania, similar stuff, even in Nevada as well. This is happening all over the place, and this should be a concern to everybody. So I just want to kind of highlight it. This is just one instance of some of the problems that we're having with the record, particularly in 2020. But guys, it's still in place across the board, 2022, 2024, and it's going to be in 26 if we don't take steps to fix things like Pass the SAVE Act would help. It's not panacea, but it's definitely a move in the right direction. Here's an example of a broader context of some of the similarities between Fulton County and Detroit, Michigan, which is in my home county of Wayne County. Some of the same things. In Fulton County, they bypass signature verification. Same thing in Detroit. Frankly, same thing across all of state of Michigan, as our Secretary of State essentially waived the requirement for signature verification for absentee ballots in the 2020 election. Also, they've got placeholder data in Fulton County. Well, guess what? They had the same thing in Detroit, and poll workers were instructed to enter in the birth date of 1/1/1900, which would have been 120 years old, for voters in that election if they didn't know what the birth date was. Well, if they didn't know what the birth date was, they shouldn't have entered in the poll book, because there's no way of verifying that person was eligible to go off and vote, because the date or their age is one of the criteria that determines whether or not somebody is eligible to vote. And then you've got gaps in the paper trail where you've got destruction of election records across the board. Well, same thing in Detroit. And then you've got the late night ballot processing surges for absentee ballots. We saw it with the infamous suitcase out in Georgia. And guess what? We had the same instance here in Michigan, in particular in Detroit. We had at 10 o'clock, after the polls had closed, we had an interview with the Detroit City Clerk, Janice Winfrey, and she was asked how many absentee ballots were being cast in the 2020 election, and she said 80,000 total. So, and then at the end of the night, guess what we found out? That there was another something like 170,000 total when all the returns came in. So how could she be off by that much? And against that backdrop, after she made that little assessment that said that there were only 80,000 ballots to count, I was an eyewitness to that infamous van that came up at the back of the TCF Center in Detroit and offloaded tens of thousands of ballots without any chain of custody whatsoever, and were inserted into the AV counting board for processing and for voting. So, and for tallying the vote. So, complete disregard for all the laws that were on the books. There was actually a law on the books that said you had to declare your AV totals by no later than 9 o'clock on election night or 8 p.m. on election night. And they were still adding to that total well into the early morning hours on Detroit. So if you wonder why folks like myself, like Mike and all on Dow TV and all the meddling kids all across the country are still so upset and so focused on what happened in 2020 and seeking accountability there, hopefully this gives you a little bit of more of an insight as to why we are so concerned with